So the equation M equals 23G gives the distance in miles M that a car can travel using G gallons of gas. So if the car has gone 300 miles, how much gas was used? Did you get that part? Correct. So class, are they giving us miles or gas when they give us a 300? So you have to put it for the variable that represents the miles. And then you have this equation. I'll reread the description. That goes here. And then you're solving for the gallons, how much gas was used. You have to isolate the variable anytime you're solving. So what's the opposite of multiplying 23? Whatever you do on one side. And yes, so that's how you get about 13.04 gallons. You definitely don't want to round it to 13 because it's definitely a decimal. But that is how you get that. Now for the next part, it says solve the original equation for G. So this is the original equation. Anytime I'm solving for a variable, what do I want to do to that variable? You want to isolate it, so you have to undo what's being done. So what's the opposite of multiplying 23? Whatever you do on one side. And then is the G alone now? So the G is alone. I can't combine anything or simplify anything on the left side. They're not like terms. So that's as far as you can go. And the G is alone, so that's technically solved for. Does that make sense? Now that was actually a unit 2 skill. It's in here again because there was something else, like there was inverse functions, but we didn't do that. We're not doing that this year. It's more like an algebra 3-4 type of thing. But we have done this before. So it is still a function. For each input, there should only be one output. But just think like anytime I'm solving for something, I need to isolate it by undoing what's being said. That one's pretty easy, so we left it on. Even though it's more a unit 2 skill. Questions on anything else from any of the study guides? So far, at least. Number 3 on the constructive response. Okay, so the cost for dog sitting is $2 per hour for the first 3 hours. After 3 hours, the cost is $12 no matter how long the dog stays. The function C gives the total cost P of H for watching a dog for H hours. Is the function C a piecewise function? So what do you think, yes or no? What makes something a piecewise function? We learned about that yesterday. I had you write it down. Maybe you're looking at your notes. Okay, good. So a function that's defined with different expressions for different intervals in the domain. What is domain referring to? All the what in a function? The exits. Domain is all the exits, right? So if you see, and having this graph here kind of helps you figure out that time in hours is your input, your domain. Are there different rules essentially for different parts of the domain for different hours? Did you say yes or no based on the situation? You guys know that or what? You need some super long explanations. You can directly tell me the answer. So is it a piecewise function? Yes or no? Are there different expressions for different intervals in the domain? Yes. Alright, so your reasoning could be basically a repeat of that definition. Or that definition doesn't make sense, put it in terms that you can understand. So yes, this is a piecewise function because there are different expressions or rules for different parts in the domain. Okay. So, and then you could even replace domain with a synonym like x's, input, hours, because there are different rules. For the first 3 hours, what are they charging me? $2 per hour. So I could represent that with this expression, 2H, 18 hours for the first 3 hours. Then after 3 hours, what's the rate? So then you can summarize that where above 3 hours, they just charge $12. So these would be your different expressions. These are different expressions. These are different rates. These are different intervals in the domain. All right, so yes, it's a piecewise function. That makes sense? So then when you have to draw the graph to represent speed, it should still be a function, like it should still be that each input just has one output. But you have to follow the rules, and I just summarized them right there for you. You would have to reread it to figure it out. But from 0 to 3 hours, they're charging the same hourly rate, right? So how can I represent that? How much does she charge when it's 0 hours? What about 1 hour? What about 2 hours? What about 3 hours? And then at 4 hours, what are they charging? So then that's where it like starts to be different, right? And from 0 to 3, it's the same rate. Should I connect the dots from 0 to 3 for the input? Should I connect these? What do you think? Could I have a fraction of an hour that the dog is there? Yeah. And could they charge me a fraction of $1? Yeah, so because it's yes for that situation for both, then yes, I can connect these dots. And sometimes there's like certain situations, like I know in your practice, there was one about a parking garage where if they're there for half an hour, they still charge them for the full hour. I think based on what they said, if it's $2 per hour, I think it's gonna look more linear, like how we connected it. So I'm gonna go with that. But then above 3 hours, so even if it's like 3 hours and 1 minute, the price is 12 no matter what. So that's where you make it kind of look like what we did yesterday. So when it's 3 hours exactly, it's still $6. But then anything above 3 hours is gonna be $12 no matter what. Or something like that. And the reason I put an open circle here is because at 3 exactly it's $6, not 12, but anything above 3 is 12. Make sense? So you just have to make sense of what's going on. If they can't have a fraction of whatever the x is, or they can't have a fraction of whatever the y is, then you might not be able to connect the dots. You can have individual dots. So good on making the graph? Okay. The next part is to define as clearly as possible the domain of C. Domain refers to all the what in a function. All the x's. So look at your x-axis. What are all my possible time in hours? So what's like my smallest time in hours? 0. with my biggest time in hours. Well, so I would say, I would agree with you 12. It doesn't say in the description, like my maximum hours is this. But if it did, then I would put whatever it said. Like, no matter how long they say, up to a maximum of blah, blah, blah. They didn't say that. So I'll agree with you 12 hours because this is where the graph ends. But you just gotta read the description for that part. Whatever the maximum is. Now, can it be everything in between 0 to 12? So can we have fractions of hours that the dog is there? Yeah. So in that case, I would write it like an inequality, like this. And I'll use X because it's no name. And these symbols, because if you put the smaller one on the left, bigger one on the right, use the less than symbol. I'm not gonna put the little line underneath for the 0 because if they're not there at all, they're not charging you anything. But anything above like a minute they are, so I'm just not gonna put the little line underneath here. I will put it for between the X and the 12. So 12 or whatever the maximum is, they can actually tell us. But the upper boundary should be whatever the maximum is. Make sense so far? And you could do it like that, or if you completely forget how to write the inequality, you could use words. So you could say all real numbers from 0 to 12. Or whatever the maximum is. And real numbers implies that it can be fractions. You see that? Real numbers include fractions. Questions on that? And I put 0 to 12. I didn't have to specify non-negative, so 0 to 12, there's no negative there, but you might see that another time. So non-negative means positive. Then they wanted us to define the range. The range refers to all the what in a function? What's my smallest y value? My smallest cost? 0, we could start it at 0. So maybe, I don't know, if they're only there for like a few minutes, maybe it's just a few pennies, I don't really know. But we can start it at 0. And then what's my highest y value? Well, now is it everything in between 0 and 12? Is that what our graph? Okay, that's everything in between 0 and 12. What about this big gap that's right here? So you have to represent that. It's everything between 0 and what? So we could use an inequality for that part. Because can you have a fraction of the cost, like $1? So then I could do up to 6. There's a rate. But then also the number 12. So you have to include both. Y can be between 0 and 6. And then it's 12 after that. You could also summarize that in words. Like all real numbers from 0 to 6. And then the number 12. So whatever your y values could be using in the group. Questions on that? We may have time for one more, depending on how short it is. Otherwise, we're gonna take a brief quiz. That'll help us prepare for unit 4 tests anyway. Okay, so don't lose that practice test, please. Include it with your binder, and I'll take that on Monday. For the quiz, you are allowed to use your notes, so you might as well keep your notes out. It's in the Schoology. You'll want to close your other tabs before you put in the password. I'll tell you the password right now. So you're allowed to use your notes, a handheld tablet.